The moment Emily Nakamura stood facing Jack Harrington and his friends in the old gymnasium, no one could have predicted that the next moment would forever change the history of Eagle Harbor. They thought they had cornered a fragile girl, but instead they awakened a warrior. This story isn't just about the rise of personal justice, but exposes the privileged class that has concealed dark secrets for 3 generations in this coastal town. Leave a comment about your experience with school discrimination. Today we'll discover how one kick can shatter a wall of silence that has lasted for decades. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the red brick buildings of Eagle Harbor Academy, a prestigious institution perched on the Massachusetts coastline like a sentinel overlooking the Atlantic. The school's imposing Georgian architecture spoke of old money and older traditions, its ivy-covered walls housing the children of New England's elite for over 150 years. The academy had begun as an exclusive institution for white sons of shipping magnates and industrial barons, but now, at least on paper, welcomed a diverse student body provided their parents could afford the staggering tuition. On this particular October morning in 2023, 17-year-old Emily Nakamura walked the polished corridors with practiced invisibility. Her slender frame seemed perpetually folded inward, long black hair falling like a curtain around her face, a barrier perfected over 4 years of trying to blend into the background of one of Massachusetts' most exclusive educational institutions. Despite possessing the kind of natural beauty that should have drawn attention, delicate features that spoke to her Japanese heritage, expressive dark eyes, and a graceful way of moving, Emily had mastered the art of being overlooked. It was a survival skill honed to perfection in a place where being different made you a target. The Nakamura family had lived in Eagle Harbor for 3 generations, but they remained perpetual outsiders in the tight-knit coastal community. Emily's grandfather, Takeo Nakamura, had returned from World War II with a chest full of medals from his service with the legendary 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the Japanese-American unit that became the most decorated in U.S. military history. Despite his heroism, he had returned to find his family's small fishing business mysteriously burned to the ground during the war years. Emily's father, James Nakamura, had grown up hearing stories of his father's valor and had once owned a respected martial arts studio in town. But economic realities had forced him to close the dojo and take a job at Harrington Shipyards, the largest employer in Eagle Harbor, to afford Emily's tuition. Her mother, Sarah, worked double shifts as a nurse at the county hospital, both parents determined to give their daughter opportunities they never had. These sacrifices weighed heavily on Emily as she navigated the academy's social minefield. She excelled academically and possessed extraordinary artistic talent, but remained deliberately on the periphery of school life. Only a few teachers and her best friend, Rachel Martinez, knew the real Emily, the one who trained in martial arts for 2 hours every morning before school in her family's converted garage, the one whose watercolor paintings revealed a depth of perception and emotion that belied her quiet demeanor. As Emily slipped into the grand library with its 20-foot ceilings and walls of leather-bound books, she sought her usual corner table, a secluded spot behind the American history section where she could work undisturbed. The massive oak table offered both privacy and a view of the harbor through leaded glass windows. On clear days like today, she could see all the way to Strawberry Hill, once the heart of Eagle Harbor's small Japanese-American community, before the urban renewal of the 1970s had mysteriously razed it to the ground. She was deeply focused on her AP chemistry homework when the library's heavy doors burst open with enough force to make several students jump. The sound echoed through the almost sacred quiet like a cannon shot, and Emily's stomach immediately clenched with familiar dread. Jack Harrington III strode into the library like he owned it, which, given his family's substantial donations to the school, he practically did. At 6'2", with perfectly styled blonde hair and the chiseled physique that came from years with private trainers, Jack was Eagle Harbor Academy's golden boy. His varsity football jacket hung perfectly on his broad shoulders, and his ice blue eyes swept the room with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. Behind him, like vassals following their king, came his 3 constant companions, Tyler Morgan, whose father was the county's most powerful judge; Lucas Reynolds, son of the bank president, who held half the town's mortgages; and Ethan Blake, whose father had been Eagle Harbor's police chief for 20 years. Together, they formed what the school secretly called the Leadership, 4 boys who could do anything, say anything, hurt anyone, and face no consequences, because their fathers collectively owned the town. Emily pressed herself deeper into her corner seat, hoping against hope that Jack would pass by without noticing her. She'd successfully avoided his attention for 3.5 years. With graduation only 7 months away, she was so close to escaping this place forever. Just keep your head down, she told herself. Just blend in. But luck, as it often did when it came to Jack Harrington, was not on her side. Well, 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 Jack's voice boomed across the library, earning sharp looks from Mrs. Patterson, the elderly librarian. He ignored them completely, his predatory gaze locked on Emily as he sauntered over to her table. If it isn't the mysterious Emily Nakamura. The way he said her last name with a slight, mocking emphasis on the pronunciation made her skin crawl. It was a microaggression she'd experienced countless times at Eagle Harbor Academy, where being one of only 9 Asian American students had meant constantly being reminded that she was different for another. Emily forced herself to look up, meeting his gaze with what she hoped was calm indifference. "Can I help you with something, Jack?" He pulled out the chair across from her and spun it around, straddling it backward in that casually arrogant way that suggested the world existed solely for his entertainment. Tyler, Lucas, and Ethan immediately flanked him their presence, turning her quiet study corner into a suffocating box. "Actually, you can," Jack said, flashing the $1 million smile that had charmed teachers, college recruiters, and countless girls before her. "Winter formal's coming up in 3 weeks." Emily's grip tightened on her pencil. She'd been dreading this moment ever since she'd overheard Jack and his friends talking about their formal strategy in the hallway last week. She'd hoped, prayed that she wouldn't be on their radar. "And I've decided," Jack continued, his tone suggesting he was bestowing upon her the greatest honor imaginable, "that you're going to be my date." The way he said it, not as a question, not even as a request, but as a statement of absolute fact, made Emily's blood run cold. She'd witnessed Jack's invitations before, watched how he collected formal dates. Like trophies, how girls who said yes found themselves discarded almost within weeks, their reputations somehow always tarnished in the aftermath. "That's very flattering," Emily said carefully, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "But I already have plans that night." It was a lie, of course. She'd planned to spend winter formal the same way she spent most weekend nights at home with her parents, working on her portfolio for art school applications. But anything was better than becoming Jack Harrington's latest conquest. The smile on Jack's face flickered for just a moment, like a glitch in a perfect mask. Behind him, Tyler and Lucas exchanged glances, clearly not used to hearing their leader rejected. "I don't think you heard me correctly," Jack said, leaning forward across the table. His voice dropped to what he probably thought was a seductive whisper, but came across as menacing. "I said you're going to be my date. Do you have any idea how many girls would kill for this opportunity?" Emily closed her textbook, slowly gathering her materials with deliberate calm. Inside, her heart was racing, but years of training, both in martial arts and in navigating the treacherous social waters of Eagle Harbor Academy, kept her movements controlled. "Then I'm sure you'll have no trouble finding one of them to go with you," she said quietly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get to my next class." She stood up, but Ethan immediately moved to block her path. At 6'4" and built like a linebacker, he was an intimidating presence. The library had gone completely quiet now, with other students pretending to study while secretly watching the drama unfold. Mrs. Patterson had conveniently disappeared into the back office, avoiding what was clearly about to become a very uncomfortable situation. "You're making a mistake," Jack said, standing as well. At his full height, he towered over Emily's 5'5" frame, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Nobody rejects Jack Harrington. Nobody." "There's a first time for everything," Emily said, trying to step around Ethan. But Lucas moved to block her other escape route, and suddenly she found herself trapped between the 4 boys and the table. Her heart was racing now, but not entirely from fear. Deep in her muscle memory, years of training began to stir, 10 years of disciplines her American classmates couldn't even pronounce, countless hours in her father's makeshift dojo, learning not just techniques, but philosophy controlled the difference between violence and justice. All of it carefully hidden beneath oversized sweaters and a reputation for being too shy to even speak up in class. "Listen, sweetheart," Tyler said, his politician's smile never wavering. The condescension in his voice made Emily's jaw clench. "Jack's trying to do you a favor here. You should be grateful." My name is Emily, she said, her voice gaining an edge that surprised even her. And I said no. Jack's face had turned an interesting shade of red, the kind that appeared when someone utterly unaccustomed to rejection finally encountered it. He stepped closer, close enough that Emily could smell his expensive cologne, mixed with the faint scent of protein shakes and entitlement. You have no idea who you're messing with, he said, his voice low and threatening. My father owns half this town. I could make your life here a living hell with one phone call. Is that what you want? Before Emily could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension like a blade. Is there a problem here? Rachel Martinez appeared like an avenging angel, her 5'10" athletic frame and fierce expression making even the four boys step back slightly. As captain of the girls' soccer team and Emily's best friend since freshman year, Rachel had a reputation for taking no nonsense from anyone regardless of their social status or family connections. No problem, Jack said smoothly, his politician's smile sliding back into place. Just inviting Emily to winter formal. We were just finishing up. He turned back to Emily, and something in his eyes made her blood run cold. It was the look of a predator who'd been denied his prey-wounded pride, mixed with the kind of rage that came from having one's perceived natural order challenged. This isn't over, he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. You're going to regret this, I promise you that. With that, he strode out of the library, Tyler, Lucas, and Ethan trailing behind him like obedient dogs. The tension in the room immediately dissipated, conversations resuming as if nothing had happened. You okay? Rachel asked, sitting down beside Emily and placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Emily nodded, though her mind was racing. She just made an enemy of the most powerful student at Eagle Harbor Academy, and she knew Jack Harrington well enough to know that his threats weren't empty. Jackass is such a pig, Rachel said, her voice filled with disgust. I can't believe he thought he could just order you to go to winter formal with him like you're some kind of accessory. It's fine, Emily said, though they both knew it wasn't. He'll get over it. Rachel gave her a look that suggested she highly doubted that. You know he's not going to let it go right. Jack Harrington doesn't handle rejection well. Remember what happened to Sarah Kim last year? Emily did remember. Sarah had turned down Jack's invitation to homecoming, and within a week she'd been completely ostracized. Jack had used his influence to get her kicked off the debate team, spread rumors about her family's restaurant failing health inspections, and made sure she wasn't invited to any social events. Sarah had spent the rest of the year eating lunch alone in the bathroom, eventually transferring to public school. I can handle Jack Harrington, Emily said quietly. Rachel studied her friend's face. She was one of the few people who knew about Emily's training, had even attended a few of her belt tests over the years. Just be careful. Okay, guys like Jack, they're dangerous because they think the rules don't apply to them. Emily nodded, gathering her books. I'll be fine, I promise. But as they left the library together, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Jack's threat hadn't been empty. She'd seen that look before, the wounded pride of someone who'd never been told no, mixed with the kind of rage that came from having one's perceived natural order challenged. It was a dangerous combination. What she couldn't have known was that at that very moment, Jack was in the parking lot with his friends already plotting her destruction. The next morning, Emily knew something was wrong the moment she walked through Eagle Harbor Academy's main entrance. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as she passed. Groups of students huddled together with phones in hand, glancing up at her with expressions ranging from pity to mockery to outright disgust. What's going on? Emily asked Rachel when she found her at their usual meeting spot by the lockers. Rachel's face was grim as she held out her phone. Jack didn't waste any time. On the screen was a post from Harbor Secrets, the anonymous Instagram account that served as the school's digital gossip mill. The post featured a photo of Emily from last year's school picture day, but with cruel digital additions, slanted lines drawn over her eyes to make them appear more stereotypically Asian. The words racist and snob scrolled across her forehead in red digital ink. The caption read, "Breaking Emily Nakamura thinks she's too good for all American boys. Little Miss Perfect turned down Jack Harrington because she only dates within her race and thinks white guys are beneath her culture. Sources say she called him typical white trash and said she only associates with people who understand real civilization. Who does this FOB think she is? Time for a reality check." The post already had over 500 likes and dozens of comments, each one more vicious than the last. Typical, come to our country and think you're better than us. My dad fought in Vietnam against people like her family. Why doesn't she just go back to Japan if America isn't good enough? Racist bitch. Hope someone teaches her a lesson. Emily felt her face burn with humiliation and rage as she scrolled through the comments. Not a single word of it was true. She'd never said anything remotely racist to Jack, had never even implied anything about his race or background. But that didn't matter. The story was spreading like wildfire, morphing and growing with each retelling. "This is slander," Rachel said, her voice shaking with anger. "We need to report this to Principal Thompson." But Emily knew how these things worked. By the time any adult took action, the damage would be done. The rumor would have spread throughout the school, shared on every social media platform, screenshotted, and saved even if the original post was taken down. By lunch, half the school would believe she was a racist who looked down on white Americans. "He said he'd make me regret it," Emily said quietly, handing the phone back to Rachel. The day that followed was a waking nightmare. Everywhere Emily went, she felt eyes on her, whispers following her down hallways. Students she'd known for years suddenly acted like she was invisible, or worse, like she was something disgusting they'd stepped in. In AP Chemistry, her lab partner, usually friendly and chatty, asked to switch partners, claiming she felt uncomfortable working with someone who has those kinds of attitudes. In English, someone had left a note on her desk that read, "Go back to your own country, racist." The teacher, Mr. Collins, pretended not to notice, even as Emily crumpled the note with shaking hands. In the hallway between classes, she overheard two sophomore girls talking. "I always thought she seemed stuck up, like she thought she was better than everyone. My mom says people like her come here and just use our schools to get ahead, then they spit on us. It's so gross, and she's not even that pretty when you really look at her." Each comment was like a physical blow, chipping away at her confidence, her sense of belonging, her carefully constructed identity as just another American teenager. She'd worked so hard to fit in, to be accepted, to prove that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. And with a few lies and a fake Instagram post, Jack had destroyed all of it by lunchtime. Emily couldn't face the cafeteria. She knew Jack and his crew would be holding court at their usual table, basking in their handiwork, probably already planning their next move. Instead, she slipped away to the old music room in the East Wing, a place that had been abandoned after budget cuts eliminated the orchestra program 2 years ago. It was her secret refuge, a place where she could practice her forms without anyone watching, where she could find peace in the meditative movements her father had taught her. The room still smelled faintly of rosin and old wood, and dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through grimy windows. She pushed open the heavy door and froze. The room wasn't empty. Sitting on one of the dusty chairs, scrolling through his phone with a satisfied smirk, was Jack Harrington. "I figured you'd come here," he said without looking up, his voice echoing in the empty space. "You're predictable, Emily. That's what makes this so easy." Emily's hand tightened on the door handle. Every instinct told her to run, but something, maybe pride, maybe just exhaustion from running all day, kept her rooted in place. "What do you want, Jack?" He finally looked up, and the cold satisfaction in his eyes made her skin crawl. "I want you to understand something." He waved his phone, showing the Instagram post that now had over 800 likes. This, he stood up, moving closer with the predatory grace of someone who'd never faced real opposition, "is just the beginning. Every day you continue to think you're too good for me, it's going to get worse. I've got connections at every college you're applying to. My dad plays golf with admissions officers. One word from him about your character issues, and your future is done. All because I won't go to winter formal with you." Emily's voice was incredulous. "This is insane, Jack." "It's not about winter formal," he snarled, his mask of civility finally slipping. "It's about respect. You disrespected me in front of my boys, in front of the whole library. Do you have any idea what that does to my reputation?" "Your reputation?" Emily laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What about my reputation? You're destroying my life because your ego got bruised." Jack's face darkened, and for a moment she saw the real him. Not the charming golden boy that everyone else saw, but something uglier, more entitled, more dangerous. You can end this right now, he said, his voice taking on a deceptively reasonable tone. Apologize publicly. Tell everyone you were wrong to reject me. Agree to be my date. Play the part of the grateful girlfriend for a few months, and maybe I'll call off the dogs. Emily felt something inside her snap. Years of keeping her head down, of avoiding conflict, of letting people like Jack Harrington walk all over others because it was easier than standing up, all of it crystallized into a single moment of clarity. No, she said simply. Jack blinked, clearly not expecting that response. No, Emily repeated, stronger this time. I won't apologize for having standards. I won't pretend to be your girlfriend, and I won't let you bully me into submission. Do your worst, Jack. Spread all the lies you want, but I will never, ever give you what you want. For a moment, Jack's mask slipped entirely, revealing the ugly rage beneath. His hands clenched into fists, and Emily automatically shifted her weight, her body preparing for violence even as her mind stayed calm. You're going to regret this, he snarled. I already do, Emily said quietly. I regret living in a world where people like you think you can take whatever you want. I regret going to a school where money and status matter more than basic human decency. But mostly I regret not standing up to you sooner. She turned to leave, but Jack's voice stopped her. 4:30 p.m. Yes, he said, old Jim, be there. Emily looked back at him. Why would I do that? His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Because if you don't, I'll make sure every college you've applied to gets a very interesting package. Your art portfolio, the one you've been working on for 3 years, I know where you keep it. Your laptop with all your essays and projects. Amazing how easy it is to accidentally destroy someone's entire academic career. Oh, and that Tanaka Foundation scholarship you're counting on. My dad's on the board. One word about your attitude problems, and it's gone. Emily's blood ran cold. Her art portfolio represented years of work, her only chance at getting into a good art program. Her laptop contained everything: college essays, recommendation letters, projects she couldn't recreate. The scholarship he was referring to was the Tanaka Foundation Scholarship for Japanese American students. $40,000 that would make the difference between her going to art school or community college. You wouldn't, she whispered. Try me, Jack said coldly. 4:30. Come alone and maybe we can work something out. Don't show, and by tomorrow morning you'll have nothing left. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Emily went through the motions of attending class, but her mind was elsewhere, weighing her options and finding them all terrible. She thought about going to Principal Thompson, but what would she say? Jack's father practically funded half the school's programs. Without proof, it would be her word against his, and she'd already seen how quickly the school community had turned against her based on anonymous Instagram posts. She thought about telling her parents, but the shame of even explaining the situation made her feel sick. They'd worked so hard to give her a good life in America, sacrificing everything to ensure she had opportunities they never did. Her father had given up his career as a martial arts instructor to work double shifts at the shipyard. Her mother cleaned hospital rooms, swallowing her pride daily to pay for Emily's tuition at Eagle Harbor Academy. How could she tell them their daughter was being targeted by the town's most powerful family? She thought about just not showing up, calling Jack's bluff, but she'd seen what he'd done to Sarah Kim, and that was just for turning down a date. What would he do to someone who had actively defied him? By the time 4 p.m. rolled around, Emily had made her decision. She would go to the old gym, face whatever Jack had planned, and find a way through it. She'd survive worse, though few people knew that. The shy, quiet girl everyone saw was a carefully constructed facade built to hide the warrior underneath. As she changed into her PE clothes in the empty locker room, she always kept a spare set in her locker for emergencies. Emily caught sight of herself in the mirror. The girl looking back at her seemed fragile, vulnerable. But as she pulled her hair back into a tight ponytail and rolled her shoulders, loosening muscles that held more strength than anyone suspected, a different person began to emerge. Her father's words echoed in her mind, spoken in Japanese during one of their training sessions. The art of war is not in seeking conflict, but in ending it decisively when it finds you. Conflict had found her whether she wanted it or not. Jack Harrington had brought this fight to her doorstep. She had tried to avoid it, tried to de-escalate, tried to walk away. But sometimes walking away wasn't an option. Sometimes you had to stand and fight. The old gymnasium was a relic from Eagle Harbor Academy's earlier days, before the new state-of-the-art athletic complex had been built with donations from grateful parents. It was scheduled for demolition after graduation, which made it the perfect place for activities the administration would rather not know about. Emily pushed open the heavy doors at exactly 4:30 p.m. and immediately knew she was walking into a trap. The gymnasium was eerily quiet, the usual after-school sports practices having been mysteriously canceled. Scattered across the hardwood floor were the contents of her art portfolio, 3 years of work spread out like trash. Watercolor paintings she'd spent months perfecting were torn and stepped on. Charcoal drawings were smeared beyond recognition. Her laptop sat near Jack's feet, and she could see her scholarship application forms crumpled nearby. Jack stood in the center of the basketball court flanked by Tyler and Lucas. But it was the fourth person who made Emily's heart sink. Ethan held up his phone, clearly ready to record whatever was about to happen and spread it across social media. "Right on time," Jack said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "I was starting to think you'd chickened out." Emily walked forward slowly, every sense on high alert. The gym's emergency exits were locked. She could see the chains from here. The main doors she'd entered through were the only way out, and Lucas was already moving to position himself between her and escape. "My portfolio," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper, as she saw her paintings torn and stepped on her charcoal drawings smeared beyond recognition. "Oh, Jack kicked at a painting she'd spent months perfecting, a delicate watercolor of cherry blossoms that was supposed to be the centerpiece of her college applications. "Yeah, we got a little bored waiting. But don't worry, there's still plenty left to destroy. Unless—" "Unless what?" Emily asked, though she already knew. "Unless you finally learn your place," Jack said, beginning to circle her like a shark. "See, I've been thinking a simple apology isn't enough anymore. You've wasted my time, embarrassed me, made me work for something that should have been freely given. So now the price has gone up." Tyler picked up her laptop, holding it carelessly above his head. "Shame if this were to have an accident. All those college applications gone. All those essays deleted, years of work destroyed." "Here's what's going to happen," Jack continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone dictating terms to a defeated enemy. "You're going to get on your knees and beg for my forgiveness. You're going to admit that you're nothing without my approval. Ethan here is going to film it, and tomorrow everyone's going to see Emily Nakamura for what she really is, a nobody who needed to learn respect." Emily felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Not fear, not even anger, just a crystal clear certainty that this ended today one way or another. "No," she said simply. Jack's eyebrows rose. "No. Did you see what we did to your precious art? Do you see what we're about to do to your future?" "I see bullies," Emily said, her voice gaining strength. "I see cowards who think destroying someone else's work makes them powerful. I see boys who are so insecure that a simple no sends them into a spiral." Tyler stepped forward, her laptop still held threateningly above his head. "Wrong answer," he said, raising it higher. That's when Emily moved. To the watching boys, it must have seemed like she teleported. One moment she was standing still. The next she was in motion, her body flowing with the controlled power of years of training. She reached Tyler before he could react, her hands shooting up to catch his wrist in an iron grip. A quick twist, a repositioning of weight, and Tyler found himself flying through the air in a perfect judo throw, the laptop safely plucked from his grasp before he hit the ground hard. The wind knocked out of him with a loud oof. Emily set the laptop down gently, then turned to face the others. "My name is Emily Nakamura," she said, her voice ringing with quiet authority. "I've been training in martial arts since I was 7 years old. I have black belts in 3 different disciplines and more self-defense training than all of you combined. I've kept this secret because I wanted a normal high school experience. But you've taken that from me." Jack laughed, but it sounded forced. "You expect us to believe that niece bluff." But Lucas charged at her, trying to tackle her while she was supposedly distracted. Emily sidestepped smoothly, using his momentum against him, adding a palm strike to redirect him straight into the bleachers with a metallic crash. "That's 2 down," Emily said calmly, never taking her eyes off Jack. Tyler was getting up, rage twisting his features. He ran at her fists, swinging wildly clearly, expecting his size advantage to overwhelm her. Emily ducked under his haymaker, grabbed his extended arm, and used a textbook hip throw to send him flying. He landed on top of some of her ruined paintings, crushing them further. In his rage and desperation, Tyler grabbed at her as he fell, his hand catching the fabric of her PE shirt. The cotton tore with a loud ripping sound, exposing her sports bra underneath. But instead of covering herself in shame as he'd intended, Emily stood tall, using the moment to shed the remains of the torn shirt entirely. "You wanted to humiliate me," she said, facing Jack directly, her voice strong and clear. "You wanted to break me, but all you've done is free me from having to hide who I really am." Jack's face had gone pale. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be in control. She was supposed to be crying, begging, broken. "Last chance, Jack," Emily said, shifting into a perfect fighting stance that spoke of years of disciplined training. "Walk away. Leave me and every other girl in this school alone, or I end this my way." Jack's ego wouldn't let him back down. With a roar of rage, he charged at her, all technique forgotten in his fury, relying on nothing but sighs and anger. Emily waited until the last second, then pivoted on her heel, her right leg swept up in a perfect roundhouse kick. The technique flawless, the power generated from her hips traveling through her leg like a whip crack. Her foot connected with the side of Jack's head with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a melon. The force of the impact lifted him off his feet, his body spinning in the air before crashing to the gymnasium floor with a thunderous bang that echoed off the walls. The silence that followed was absolute. Jack Harrington, the third football captain, golden boy of Eagle Harbor Academy, heir to a shipbuilding fortune, lay sprawled on the polished hardwood, completely unconscious. "Ethan," Emily said, and he jumped like he'd been electrocuted. "You're going to pick up every piece of my artwork. You're going to be very careful with what can be salvaged. Then you're going to tell everyone exactly what happened here. The truth. All of it." "Yes," Ethan stammered, his phone clattering to the floor, the recording forgotten. "Whatever you say." That's when the gym doors burst open. Principal Michael Thompson stood in the doorway, his weathered face taking in the scene with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen 3 decades of teenage drama. Behind him came Coach Davis, 2 security guards, and Rachel, who rushed immediately to Emily's side with a towel to cover her. "I called them," Rachel said breathlessly, wrapping the towel around Emily's shoulders. "I knew something was wrong when you didn't answer my texts." Principal Thompson surveyed the destruction, Jack unconscious on the floor, Tyler and Lucas groaning and trying to sit up, Emily's artwork scattered like confetti, and Ethan standing frozen with his hands full of torn paintings. "Someone better start explaining," Principal Thompson said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had dealt with entitled rich kids for 20 years. Now, Ethan was the first to break. The police chief's son had inherited his father's instinct for self-preservation, and he could read the writing on the wall. "It was all Jack's idea," he blurted out, his hands shaking as he carefully gathered pieces of Emily's artwork. "He stole her portfolio from the art room this morning. He threatened to destroy everything if she didn't come here and humiliate herself on camera. I have it all recorded." Coach Davis retrieved Ethan's dropped phone, his face darkening as he watched the video. The audio was crystal clear. Jack's threats, his blackmail scheme, his demand that Emily beg for forgiveness. "Jesus Christ," Coach Davis muttered. Then louder, "Jesus Christ, Harrington." Principal Thompson was already on his phone. "I need police and paramedics at the old gymnasium immediately. We have multiple injured students in evidence of theft, destruction of property, and attempted blackmail." Tyler struggled to sit up, holding his ribs where they'd connected with the bleachers. "She attacked us," he protested. "That psycho just started throwing people around." "Shut your mouth, Morgan," Coach Davis roared, his usual calm demeanor completely gone. "I just watched you threaten to destroy her laptop and try to assault her. You're lucky she didn't break every bone in your body." Lucas, his nose bleeding from his encounter with the bleachers, seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. In a move that would have surprised anyone who knew his usual loyalty to Jack, he spoke up. "Jack's done this before," he said suddenly, his voice nasal from his broken nose. "He has files on his phone, screenshots, plans, everything. There are at least a dozen other girls." "You little snitch." Tyler tried to lunge at Lucas but collapsed immediately, still winded from his flight through the air. Lucas ignored him, pulling out his own phone with shaking hands. I took pictures of his phone last month when he was bragging about it. I thought it was insurance, in case he ever turned on me." Rachel knelt beside Emily, who was sitting on the floor next to her ruined artwork. tears finally falling as she picked up the remains of a self-portrait that was supposed to be the centerpiece of her college applications. 3 years of work, Emily whispered, holding fragments of the painting that had taken her months to perfect. We'll figure something out, Rachel said fiercely. The admissions committees will understand when they hear what happened. Miss Nakamura, Principal Thompson said gently, crouching down beside her, I need you to know that the school will do everything in its power to help you recover from this. We'll contact every college you've applied to explain the situation and provide any documentation you need. The police arrived within minutes, followed closely by paramedics who immediately attended to Jack. He was starting to regain consciousness, groaning and disoriented. What? What happened? He slurred, trying to sit up as the paramedics checked his pupils for signs of concussion. You got exactly what you deserved, Officer Martinez said, reading him his rights as the paramedics cleared him for arrest. Jack Harrington, you're under arrest for theft, destruction of property, harassment, and attempted blackmail. You can't do this, Jack protested weakly, his usual arrogance dampened by his obvious disorientation. My father. Your father is already here, Officer Martinez interrupted, as Douglas Harrington stormed into the gym, his face purple with rage. This is outrageous, Mr. Harrington shouted, his expensive suit and perfectly styled hair looking out of place in the dusty gymnasium. My son is injured and you're arresting him. That girl assaulted him. Emily stood up still in her torn clothes but with dignity intact. Your son stole 3 years of my artwork. He destroyed it to blackmail me into humiliating myself on camera. He threatened to sabotage my college applications and scholarship opportunities. I defended myself when he and his friends became physical. She's lying, Mr. Harrington sputtered, but his bluster seemed forced. Actually, Principal Thompson said, holding up Ethan's phone, we have the entire incident on video, including your son admitting to theft and blackmail. The color drained from Mr. Harrington's face as Principal Thompson pressed play. The gymnasium filled with Jack's voice, outlining his blackmail plan, threatening to destroy Emily's future, demanding she beg for his forgiveness. When the recording reached the part where Jack charged at Emily and she defended herself with the roundhouse kick, Mr. Harrington closed his eyes in defeat. Furthermore, Officer Martinez added, scrolling through Lucas's phone, we'll be obtaining a warrant for your son's phone and social media accounts based on Mr. Reynolds' statement and these photographs. We believe there may be evidence of similar crimes against other students. Over the next few hours, the gym became a crime scene. Photographers documented Emily's destroyed artwork, each piece carefully cataloged as evidence. Investigators collected the torn paintings, smashed sculptures, and crumpled scholarship forms, treating them with a solemnity usually reserved for more traditional crimes. But as news of the incident spread through the school's social media networks, something unprecedented began to happen. Twist number 1, the accidental evidence. Rachel was the first to notice it. Emily, she said, staring at her phone in amazement, you need to see this. The recording Ethan had been making hadn't just been saved to his phone. It had been accidentally live-streamed on Jack's Instagram account, which was still logged in on Ethan's device from an earlier social media collaboration. Over 2,000 people had watched the confrontation in real time, and the video had already been downloaded and reshared hundreds of times. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. Holy #%, did you see that? Kick girl's a warrior. Those boys got what they deserved. Jack Harrington is a predator. This is what happens when you corner someone who's been trained. Respect. Someone needs to check on this girl. This is clearly a pattern of abuse. That roundhouse kick was perfect technique. She's been training for years. But more importantly, the live stream had caught everything: Jack's threats, the blackmail scheme, the destruction of property, and most crucially, the moment when Jack charged at Emily, first making her response clearly self-defense. This changes everything, Principal Thompson said, watching the video on Officer Martinez's tablet. This isn't just harassment anymore. With this many witnesses and this clear evidence of premeditation, Officer Martinez nodded grimly. We're looking at serious felony charges. And if other victims come forward, they didn't have to wait long. Within hours of the video going viral, Emily's phone was buzzing with messages from girls she barely knew. Sarah Kim, who had transferred schools the previous year, sent a lengthy text detailing how Jack had systematically destroyed her social life after she rejected him. Rebecca Johnson revealed how he'd threatened to spread lies about her family's immigration status. Emma Wilson shared screenshots of fake social media accounts Jack had created to harass her. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Twist number 2, the Harbor Files. 2 days after the incident, as Emily sat in Principal Thompson's office with her parents and a lawyer provided by the Japanese American Citizens League, there was a knock at the door. Eleanor Wilson, the school's elderly history teacher, entered, looking flustered, her arms full of old leather-bound books and manila folders. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "But after hearing about what happened, I started searching through the school archives. I think there's something here you all need to see." She placed a stack of dusty folders on the principal's desk. They were labeled Harbor Files 1942-1950. "I found these hidden behind a false wall in the library archives," Ms. Wilson explained. "I was researching the school's history for our 150th anniversary and, well, I accidentally dislodged a brick, and there they were. I've only had time to skim through them, but what I've found is disturbing." Principal Thompson opened the top folder and began reading, his face growing increasingly grave. "These are minutes from school board meetings during and after World War II, he said slowly. "They detailed discussions about preventing Japanese-American families from returning to Eagle Harbor after the internment camps closed. There are letters from the Harrington family, Jack's grandfather, advocating for keeping Eagle Harbor pure." Emily's father leaned forward, his face a mask of controlled anger. "My father always said there was a reason most Japanese-American families couldn't reclaim their properties after the war. He told me the official explanation that the properties had been legally sold was a lie." Ms. Wilson nodded grimly. "According to these records, it appears the Harrington shipyard, in cooperation with the town council and the school board, systematically acquired properties owned by Japanese-American families after they were sent to internment camps. The transactions were technically legal but deeply unethical, taking advantage of families who were imprisoned and desperate for funds." She pulled out a map from another folder. "This is Eagle Harbor in 1940. You can see here," she pointed to an area labeled Doyitom, Strawberry Hill. "This entire neighborhood was primarily Japanese-American owned. Fishing businesses, shops, homes. By 1950, it was all gone, replaced by the Harrington Marina and luxury homes." Emily stared at the map, a strange feeling washing over her. Strawberry Hill. That was where her grandfather had lived before the war, the place she could see from the library window, the place that had been mysteriously redeveloped in the 1970s. "There's more," Ms. Wilson said, her voice dropping lower. "The files mention something called Warehouse Number 7 at the Harrington shipyard. Apparently that's where they stored items of interest from the confiscated properties. I don't know if it still exists, but—" Emily's father's face had gone pale. "Warehouse Number 7 is still there. I work in Warehouse Number 5. Number 7 is always locked, and we're told it's for historical archives. No one is allowed inside except the Harrington family." A heavy silence fell over the room. The connection between past and present, between what had happened to Emily and what had happened to her community decades ago, suddenly seemed clear as crystal. Principal Thompson took a deep breath. "Ms. Wilson, these documents could be crucial evidence in a much larger case. I think we need to contact the district attorney immediately." As they left the principal's office, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that what had started as a case of high school bullying was about to expose something much older and much darker. The roundhouse kick that had knocked Jack Harrington unconscious had somehow cracked open a wall of silence that had stood for over 70 years. Her grandfather had always told her that America was a land of second chances and delayed justice. "Sometimes the truth sleeps," he would say in Japanese, "but it never dies." As Emily walked through the hushed corridors of Eagle Harbor Academy, past students who now looked at her with something approaching awe, she realized that her personal fight for dignity had become something much larger, a reckoning with history that was long overdue. And somewhere beneath the polished veneer of Eagle Harbor, in a locked warehouse by the sea, secrets that had been buried for 3 generations were about to be exposed to the light of day. The discovery of the Harbor Files sent shockwaves through Eagle Harbor Academy. What had begun as a case of high school bullying was rapidly expanding into something far more significant, a decades-old conspiracy that touched the town's most powerful families. For Emily Nakamura, whose roundhouse kick had not only knocked Jack Harrington unconscious, but also cracked open the wall of silence surrounding Eagle Harbor's dark past, the days following the gymnasium confrontation were a dizzying blur of police interviews, legal consultations, and an unexpected spotlight. The local newspaper, the Eagle Harbor Gazette, ran a front-page story with the headline, "Martial Arts Student Exposes Pattern of Abuse at Academy." The online version included the viral video, which had now been viewed over 500,000 times. But it was the sidebar story, "History Teacher Discovers Documents Linking Prominent Family to Post-War Property Seizures," that caught the attention of people far beyond the small coastal town. Emily sat at her kitchen table a week after the incident, sipping tea with her grandfather, Takeo Nakamura. At 93, the former member of the legendary 442nd Regimental Combat Team still possessed a warrior's spirit in his aged frame. His gnarled hands wrapped around a steaming cup of green tea bore the scars of both combat and decades of hard labor. "You did what I could not do," he said in Japanese, his eyes holding a mixture of pride and old sorrow. "You stood up." Emily looked at the Purple Heart and Bronze Star medals displayed in a simple wooden frame on the wall. Her grandfather had returned from Europe, a decorated hero, only to find his family's home and fishing business gone, their community scattered. "I just defended myself, Oji-san," she replied softly. "I wasn't trying to start a revolution." The old man smiled, the deep lines around his eyes crinkling. "The best revolutions are the ones we do not plan. They come from a single moment of truth." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Rachel entered, followed by Mrs. Eleanor Wilson, the history teacher who had discovered the Harbor Files. At 72, Mrs. Wilson had been teaching at Eagle Harbor Academy for over 40 years, her silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses giving her the appearance of a kindly librarian rather than someone who had just ignited a historical powder keg. "I've found something else," Mrs. Wilson said without preamble, placing a weathered leather journal on the table. This was hidden inside the binding of one of the Harbor Files books. It belonged to William Crawford, the school's principal, from 1945 to 1957. Emily opened the journal carefully, its pages yellow with age. The handwriting inside was precise, almost architectural in its clarity. "He was keeping a secret record." Mrs. Wilson explained, her voice low as if Crawford might still be listening. "He didn't agree with what was happening, but he was afraid to speak out publicly. Instead, he documented everything: names, dates, property transfers, the formation of what he called the Harbor Preservation Society." Emily looked up sharply. "The Harbor Preservation Society? That's still around. They run the Historical Society and the Maritime Museum." Mrs. Wilson nodded grimly. "According to Crawford, it was originally formed in 1945 with a very specific purpose: to preserve the cultural character of Eagle Harbor by preventing Japanese-American families from reclaiming their properties after internment. Its founding members included Charles Harrington, Jack's grandfather, Judge William Morgan, and Police Chief James Blake. "The grandfathers of Jack's friends," Rachel said, making the connection immediately. "Tyler Morgan and Ethan Blake." "Exactly, Mrs. Wilson confirmed. "Crawford writes that the society used a combination of legal maneuvers, intimidation, and what he calls selective enforcement to keep returning Japanese-American families from reestablishing themselves in town. Those who persisted faced mysterious property damage, denied bank loans, and even physical threats." Takeo Nakamura closed his eyes briefly, pain crossing his weathered face. "This is what happened to my father's fishing boat. They called it vandalism. The police did nothing." Emily placed her hand over her grandfather's. "Oh, Jason, why didn't you ever tell me the whole story?" The old man sighed. "What purpose would it serve to fill a young heart with old bitterness? Your generation deserves to look forward, not backward." "But there's no forward without truth," Emily replied, a new resolve hardening in her voice. Rachel, who had been scanning through the journal, suddenly stopped at a page. "Listen to this, April 15, 1946. Today I witnessed the removal of all records pertaining to Japanese-American property ownership from the town archives. CH personally supervised the transfer of these documents to what he called secure storage at the shipyard. He mentioned something called Warehouse 7. I believe they are creating an alternate history, one where these families never existed as property owners. Emily exchanged a meaningful look with her grandfather. The warehouse Dad mentioned it. It's still there. Mrs. Wilson nodded. Crawford speculates that the warehouse contains not just documents, but personal belongings confiscated from Japanese American homes, items deemed too valuable to waste, when families were given just days to pack before internment. The implication hung in the air like a thundercloud. For decades, the Harrington family had potentially been sitting on a trove of stolen property and falsified documents. We need to get into that warehouse, Emily said. That won't be easy, Rachel cautioned. It's on private property, heavily secured. And after what happened with Jack, the Harringtons will be watching for anything that could make the situation worse. Maybe we don't have to break in, Emily said thoughtfully. My dad works there. He might know something about the security, or maybe there's another way. The conversation was interrupted by a phone call. Emily's father, his voice tense, informed them that Douglas Harrington had called an emergency board meeting at the academy. Rumors were flying that he planned to demand Principal Thompson's resignation and the expulsion of both Emily and Rachel for the shameful treatment of his son. He's trying to regain control of the narrative, Mrs. Wilson said after Emily hung up. Classic damage control. But he doesn't know about the journal yet, or that we've connected the dots between present-day bullying and historical discrimination. We need more evidence, Emily said. Something that can't be dismissed as just one person's journal. There might be another source, Takeo said quietly. The three women turned to him. Frank Sullivan, he was deputy mayor in the 1970s when they tore down what was left of Strawberry Hill for the urban renewal project. He and my friend Kenji Tanaka were always at odds over it. If anyone knows the truth from the town government side, it would be him. Frank Sullivan, Rachel looked surprised. The old guy who runs the Lighthouse Diner. My mom waitresses there on weekends. Takeo nodded. In America, sometimes the most important people look the most ordinary. Later that afternoon, Emily and Rachel entered the Lighthouse Diner, a weathered establishment perched on the edge of the harbor. Its faded blue exterior had withstood decades of nor'easters, and the interior looked frozen in 1965 vinyl booths, Formica countertops, and a vintage jukebox that still played 45s. Frank Sullivan, 83 years old with a sailor's weather-beaten face and a full head of white hair, was wiping down the counter when they entered. He looked up, recognition flickering in his eyes. You're Takeo's granddaughter, he said to Emily without preamble. The one who finally taught Jack Harrington the lesson his daddy should have given him years ago. There was approval in his voice, but also wariness. What brings you to my humble establishment? Emily glanced around the half-empty diner. We'd like to talk to you about Strawberry Hill and the urban renewal project of 1972. Sullivan's hand stilled on the countertop. That's ancient history, young lady. Not to my grandfather, Emily replied, and maybe not to Eagle Harbor either. Sullivan studied her for a long moment, then jerked his head toward a booth in the back. Sit down, I'll bring coffee. When he returned with 3 steaming mugs, Sullivan slid into the booth across from them and spoke in a voice just above a whisper. I've been waiting 50 years for someone to ask the right questions, he said. After what you did to the Harrington boy, I figure you've earned some answers. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. This opens a storage room in the back of the old Hudson gas station on Maple Street. Been abandoned since '80, but I kept paying the property tax. Inside you'll find what I couldn't bring myself to destroy, but was too much of a coward to reveal. Emily took the key, her pulse quickening. What's in there? Sullivan's eyes darted to the diner's entrance before he answered. Evidence of what really happened to Strawberry Hill. Of why the Harringtons, Morgans, and Blakes still run this town like their personal fiefdom. It wasn't just about property or money. It was about a secret they've kept for 3 generations. Oh, what secret? Rachel pressed. The old man's voice dropped even lower. During the war, the Harrington shipyard took government contracts, big ones. But Charles Harrington was skimming materials, selling them on the black market. Your great-grandfather, Hideo Nakamura, caught him. Had documentation. That's the real reason the Harringtons made sure your family never got their property back. Not prejudice, though there was plenty of that too, but fear. Fear of what Hideo knew. Emily felt a chill run through her. But my great-grandfather died in the Manzanar internment camp in 1944. Sullivan nodded grimly. Officially from pneumonia, but he'd sent letters to his friend, Kenji Tanaka, letters that hinted at what he knew. After the war, when Kenji tried to reclaim the Nakamura property and mentioned those letters, Sullivan drew a finger across his throat. Are you saying the Harringtons had something to do with Kenji Tanaka's death? Emily asked, her voice barely audible. I'm not saying anything that direct, Sullivan replied carefully. Just that there was a fire at the Tanaka farm in 1947. Just that the police investigation was suspiciously brief. Just that afterward, most of the remaining Japanese-American families left Eagle Harbor for good. Rachel looked stunned. And all this connects to the Urban Renewal Project. Sullivan nodded. By the early 1970s, the civil rights movement had reached even Eagle Harbor. Some of the younger Japanese Americans who'd grown up hearing their parents' stories started asking questions, demanding records. The Harringtons and their allies on the town council pushed through the renewal project to literally bulldoze the evidence, the few remaining Japanese American-owned buildings in what was left of Strawberry Hill. But you kept records, Emily said, holding up the key. I did, Sullivan confirmed. I was just a deputy mayor, then powerless against the Harrington machine. But I couldn't stand by and do nothing. So I salvaged what I could: photographs, council minutes, property deeds. I always thought someday the truth would come out. Maybe that someday is now. As they left the diner, Rachel looked at Emily with wide eyes. This is bigger than high school bullying, Em. We're talking about potential criminal conspiracy spanning decades. Emily nodded, the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. And it all connects Jack's behavior, the stolen properties, my grandfather's lost heritage. It's like the past and present are the same story, just different chapters. What do we do now? Rachel asked. Emily held up the key to the old gas station. We find the evidence, then we decide who to trust with it. The Hudson gas station stood like a ghost from another era, its faded red and blue paint peeling, vintage pumps frozen in time with their analog displays still showing gas at $1.21 per gallon. The building had once been a community hub where locals gathered to gossip while their tanks filled and their windshields were washed by attendants in crisp uniforms. Now it was a relic surrounded by overgrown weeds and forgotten by most of Eagle Harbor, the perfect place to hide secrets in plain sight. Emily and Rachel approached cautiously, checking to make sure they hadn't been followed. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete. The main door was padlocked and rusted, but a smaller side entrance had a newer-looking lock that accepted Sullivan's key. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the lingering smell of motor oil. Vintage signs advertising Winston cigarettes and Coca-Cola hung crookedly on the walls. An old cash register sat on the counter, frozen with its last transaction displayed. This place is creepy, Rachel whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. Emily moved purposefully toward a door marked Storage Employees Only. It too opened with Sullivan's key. Inside was a small room lined with metal shelving, most of it empty except for a few old parts catalogs and motor oil cans. There's nothing here, Rachel said, disappointment evident in her voice. But Emily was studying the floor. Look at these marks, she said, pointing to faint scratches in the concrete. Something heavy gets moved here regularly. Together, they pushed against the back shelving unit. It resisted at first, then slid sideways with a groan of metal on concrete, revealing a trap door set into the floor. A basement, Rachel breathed. I didn't think these old stations had basements. This one does, Emily replied, already pulling on the recessed handle. The trapdoor opened to reveal a steep set of stairs descending into darkness. Emily used her phone's flashlight to illuminate the way down. The basement was surprisingly large and dry, clearly not part of the original station, but a later addition. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall, while cardboard boxes filled with folders were stacked neatly on heavy wooden tables. A single naked bulb hung from the ceiling, which Emily switched on to reveal the full extent of Sullivan's secret archive. This is incredible, Rachel said, turning slowly to take it all in. He's been collecting evidence for decades. Emily was already opening the nearest filing cabinet. Inside were hundreds of property deeds organized by year from 1940 to 1950. Many had red stamps marking them as transferred under War Relocation Authority, and new ownership papers showing the properties passing to companies with names like Eagle Harbor Development Corporation and Coastal Holding Company. These were shell companies, Emily realized reading through the incorporation papers, all ultimately owned by the Harringtons, Morgans, and Blakes. They used them to hide the direct transfer of properties. Rachel had opened one of the boxes and was carefully spreading its contents on a table. "Look at these," she said, holding up black and white photographs. Strawberry Hill before the war. The photos showed a vibrant community fishing boats with Japanese names painted on their hulls, small shops with both English and Japanese signage, families standing proudly in front of modest but well-maintained homes. One large photograph showed a community celebration with American flags prominently displayed alongside paper lanterns and traditional decorations. "This was their America too," Emily said softly, touching the faces in the photographs. Some of them resembled relatives. She knew the same eyes, the same determined set of the jaw. As they continued searching through the materials, they found increasingly disturbing evidence. A series of typed minutes from Harbor Preservation Society's meetings detailed strategies for preventing Japanese-American families from returning, including bribing bank officials to deny loans and pressuring insurance companies to cancel policies. Most damning was a folder labeled Tanaka Investigation 1947. Inside were newspaper clippings about the fire that had killed Kenji Tanaka, along with a handwritten statement from a firefighter named Michael O'Donnell that had never been included in the official report. O'Donnell had noted that the fire showed signs of arson, specifically that it appeared to have started in multiple locations simultaneously, and that he had found fragments of a glass bottle that may have been used as an incendiary device. A note paperclipped to the statement in what Emily assumed was Sullivan's handwriting read, "O'Donnell transferred to Boston Fire Dep 1 week after submitting this report. Police Chief Blake personally removed this statement from the file before it was officially closed as accidental fire." "This is evidence of a cover-up," Rachel said, her voice shaking slightly. "Maybe even murder." Emily was about to respond when a noise from upstairs froze them both. Footsteps moved across the main floor of the gas station, and a beam of light swept under the storage room door. "Someone's here," Emily whispered quickly, switching off the basement light. "We need to hide." They closed the trap door as quietly as possible, just as they heard the storage room door open. Through the thin crack where the trap door met the floor, Emily could see the beam of a powerful flashlight sweeping the room. "I know someone's been here," a gruff voice said. "The shelf's been moved." Emily recognized the voice with a jolt. Chief Blake Ethan's father and the current head of the Eagle Harbor Police Department. The same family that had buried the evidence of arson 75 years ago. "Maybe Sullivan finally decided to clean the place out," another voice responded. This one Emily didn't recognize. "Sullivan hasn't set foot in here for months," Blake replied. "He's getting sentimental in his old age, talking too much, especially after what happened with the Nakamura girl and young Harrington. Douglas is handling the situation at the school. Thompson will be gone by the end of the week." "That's not enough," Blake said sharply. "If people start digging into the past, asking the wrong questions, we need to move everything from Warehouse 7, somewhere off-site. That's dozens of boxes records going back 80 years. Where would we even put it all? I don't care if we have to dump it in the harbor. Douglas wants it gone before anyone gets a court order to search the shipyard." The beam of light paused at the edge of the trapdoor. Emily held her breath, her hand finding Rachel's in the darkness. "What's that on the floor?" the second voice asked. Chief Blake's footsteps approached the trapdoor. Emily tensed, preparing for a discovery. But at that moment, a phone rang loudly. "Blake here," the chief answered curtly. There was a pause as he listened. "Now, I'll be right there." The footsteps receded, and Emily heard Blake say, "That was the station. We've got reporters from the Boston Globe asking questions about the Academy incident. I need to go make a statement before this gets any more out of hand. We'll deal with this place later." Minutes later, the storage room door closed, and they heard a car start outside and drive away. Emily and Rachel waited a full 5 minutes in the darkness before daring to open the trapdoor again. "That was too close," Rachel whispered, her face pale in the glow of their phone flashlights. "They know people are investigating the past. And they're planning to destroy the evidence in Warehouse 7, Emily added grimly. "Whatever's in there must be even more damning than what we found here." They worked quickly, photographing the most important documents with their phones and selecting key items to take with them: the firefighter's statement, the most explicit Harbor Preservation Society minutes, and several property deeds showing the transfer of Nakamura and Tanaka properties to Harrington-controlled companies. As they carefully replaced the shelving unit and locked the storage room door behind them, Emily felt a strange mixture of emotions. Anger at the injustice her family had suffered, fear of the powerful forces they were challenging, but most of all a burning determination to expose the truth that had been buried for too long. "We need to move fast," she told Rachel as they hurried back toward town. "If Blake and the Harringtons are already planning to destroy evidence, we don't have much time." "Who can we trust with this?" Rachel asked. "The police chief is part of the conspiracy. The town council has been controlled by these families for generations. Even the school board." Emily thought for a moment. "We need to go bigger than Eagle Harbor. This isn't just a local story anymore." The next morning, Eagle Harbor woke to find itself the subject of a front-page expose in the Boston Globe. Decades of discrimination. How three families built an empire on stolen property. The article, written by Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist Michael Chen, detailed the systematic theft of Japanese-American properties after World War II and connected it directly to the present-day power structure of Eagle Harbor. The story included scanned copies of several documents from Sullivan's archive photographs of Strawberry Hill before its destruction and a detailed timeline of events from 1942 to the present day. It quoted anonymous sources close to the current investigation and mentioned that additional evidence might be found in a storage facility at Harrington's shipyard known as Warehouse 7. The article also drew explicit connections between the historical discrimination and the recent incident at Eagle Harbor Academy, suggesting that Jack Harrington's behavior was part of a generational pattern of entitlement and abuse of power. By noon, news vans from Boston and Providence had descended on Eagle Harbor. Reporters clustered outside the town hall, the police station, and the gates of Harrington's shipyard. Douglas Harrington issued a terse statement through his lawyer, denouncing the article as a collection of baseless allegations designed to distract from an unfortunate incident between teenagers. At Eagle Harbor Academy, an emergency board meeting had been called. Emily's father texted her that Douglas Harrington was demanding Principal Thompson's immediate dismissal for mishandling the situation and encouraging a media circus that has damaged the school's reputation. But Thompson wasn't going quietly. In a move that shocked the board, he arrived at the meeting accompanied by Eleanor Wilson and three elderly Japanese-American former residents of Eagle Harbor who had seen the article and driven up from Boston that morning. One of them, Dr. Masato Watanabe, was the nephew of Kenji Tanaka, the man who had died in the suspicious fire of 1947. "I have spent 75 years wondering what really happened to my uncle," Dr. Watanabe told the stunned board members. "His death was the reason my family never returned to Eagle Harbor, though this town had been our home for 2 generations. Today, because of the courage of a young student and a history teacher who refused to bury the past, I finally have answers." As the board meeting devolved into chaos, Emily received an urgent text from her father. "Security increased at Warehouse 7. Extra guards trucks being loaded. Whatever's in there is being moved tonight. This might be our only chance." Emily showed the message to Rachel, who was staying at the Nakamura home for safety after receiving threatening messages from anonymous accounts. "We can't break into a shipyard," Rachel protested. "That's federal property, high security. We'd end up in jail and the evidence would still be destroyed." "We don't have to break in," Emily replied. "Dad has legitimate access, and he's not the only one who's tired of the Harringtons' control over this town." By late afternoon, word had spread through the shipyard workers, many of whom had seen the Boston Globe article and recognized the truth in its claims. Douglas Harrington's hasty denials and the sudden activity around Warehouse 7 only confirmed their suspicions. James Nakamura, who had worked at the shipyard for 15 years, found himself surrounded by colleagues offering support. Many had parents or grandparents who remembered the original Strawberry Hill community. Others had experienced the Harringtons' harsh labor practices or witnessed their influence over local politics. "Whatever you need, James," his supervisor told him quietly during the afternoon shift change. "A lot of us have been waiting a long time for someone to stand up to them." That night, as a light fog rolled in from the Atlantic, obscuring the shipyard's floodlights, James Nakamura's security badge granted access not just to him, but to Emily Rachel and a Boston Globe photographer who had slipped in through a service entrance where a guard conveniently looked the other way. Warehouse 7 stood apart from the other buildings, its weathered brick exterior unmarked, except for a simple number above the heavy steel door. Unlike the active warehouses with their constant flow of workers and materials, this building had an abandoned feel. Despite its new security measures, two guards posted at the entrance and a security camera recently installed above the door. The guards changed shift at midnight, James whispered as they watched from the shadow of Warehouse 5. There's a 10-minute window when the night guard does his first perimeter check. At precisely midnight, they watched the day shift guard hand over to a younger man who immediately left his post to begin his rounds just as James had predicted. Now, James said, and they moved quickly across the open space between buildings. James's badge worked on the electronic lock, and they slipped inside, closing the door softly behind them. Emily's father quickly disabled the security camera by the simple expedient of covering it with a shipyard cap. Inside, Warehouse 7 was unlike any of the working storage facilities at the shipyard. Instead of industrial shelving and shipping containers, the space was arranged more like a museum archive, rows of filing cabinets, carefully labeled boxes, and a section of larger items covered with cloths. They've already started packing things up, Rachel noted, pointing to a stack of boxes near the door labeled off-site storage priority. They split up, each taking a different section of the warehouse. The Boston Globe photographer Lisa Wong documented everything methodically, while Rachel focused on files that matched the dates they had identified as crucial from Sullivan's archive. Emily found herself drawn to the covered items at the back of the warehouse. Pulling aside a dust cloth, she revealed an ornate tansu chest, its dark wood inlaid with mother of pearl. A label attached to it read, Nakamura Residence 1942. Her hands trembling slightly, Emily opened the chest. Inside were family photographs, documents, and personal items that had belonged to her great-grandparents, things that should have been returned to her family decades ago. Dad, she called softly, her voice thickened with emotion. You need to see this. James Nakamura stood frozen before the chest, his eyes fixed on a photograph of his grandparents, standing proudly in front of a small but tidy house with a fishing boat visible in the background. My father used to describe this place to me, he said quietly. I thought he was just sharing memories. I never imagined the evidence was sitting here all along. But it wasn't just Nakamura family heirlooms. The warehouse contained similar items from dozens of Japanese-American families: furniture, artwork, photograph albums, business records, even children's toys. An entire community's heritage systematically confiscated and hidden away. This isn't just theft, Lisa Wong said, as she photographed a wall of filing cabinets containing property deeds and business licenses. This is cultural erasure. They tried to wipe out any evidence that these families were successful, established Americans. In the priority boxes, they found the most damning evidence of all correspondence between Charles Harrington and government officials during World War II, detailing his scheme to acquire Japanese-American properties at fraction of their value. Ledgers showing the profits from selling materials stolen from government shipbuilding contracts, and a series of letters that appeared to implicate Harrington in reporting loyal Japanese-American citizens as security risks to ensure they would be sent to internment camps. This is why they were so desperate to keep the past buried, Emily realized. Not just property theft, but potential treason during wartime. The great patriotic Harrington family fortune was built on betraying their own country during a world war. They worked quickly, photographing everything they could and selecting key documents to take with them. James found the original deed to the Nakamura fishing business and home properties that had been in their family since 1807 and were now part of the exclusive Harrington Marina complex. As they were preparing to leave, Rachel made one final discovery, a locked metal box labeled simply Tanaka Fire. Using a screwdriver from James's tool belt, they managed to pry it open. Inside was a typed report on Harrington Shipyard letterhead dated June 15, 1947. It detailed payments to two men identified only by initials for special security work at the T property on the night of the fire that killed Kenji Tanaka. Paper-clipped to the report was a handwritten note, "Problem solved. Destroy this after reading. CH." "This is evidence of murder," James said, his voice hollow with shock. "They killed a man to cover up their crimes, then built a fortune on the proceeds." Emily stared at the document, thinking of Dr. Watanabe and his 75 years of unanswered questions about his uncle's death. "This ends now," she said firmly. "All of it." They had just finished repacking their selected documents when a noise at the warehouse door made them freeze. The sound of a key card being swiped was followed by the heavy door swinging open. Chief Blake stood in the doorway, his service weapon drawn. Behind him was Douglas Harrington, his face twisted with rage. I knew someone would try this. Blake said, his eyes scanning the warehouse and fixing on the four intruders. Step away from those documents, now. James moved protectively in front of Emily and Rachel. This is over, Blake. You can't bury the truth any longer. You're trespassing on private property, Harrington snapped. Chief, arrest them all. Blake took a step forward but hesitated as Lisa Wong raised her camera. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Chief, she said calmly. Everything we found tonight has already been transmitted to my editors. The story will run with or without me, but it would certainly make for a more dramatic narrative if you arrest a Boston Globe photographer for documenting historical evidence. You're bluffing, Harrington said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Am I, mate? Wong countered, holding up her camera so they could see the screen on the back, which showed a progress bar for an upload. Cloud storage is a wonderful thing. Everything we've photographed in the last hour is already safely backed up to the Globe's servers. Blake lowered his weapon slightly, his expression conflicted. For the first time, Emily saw him not as the implacable enemy, but as a man trapped in a generational conspiracy he had inherited. It's not just about the property, Emily said, addressing Blake directly. It's about murder. Kenji Tanaka in 1947. Your father was police chief then. He buried the evidence of arson. That makes him an accessory after the fact. Is that a legacy you want to continue? Blake's face paled. That's a serious accusation. One we can prove, Emily replied, holding up the report they'd found in the metal box. Your father protected a murderer. Are you going to do the same? A long, tense silence filled the warehouse. Then slowly, Chief Blake holstered his weapon. Douglas, he said quietly, I think it's time we had a different kind of conversation about this situation. You can't be serious, Harrington spluttered. These people are criminals. They broke into my property. Actually, James Nakamura said, stepping forward with the original deed to his family's property in his hand, I think we might need to reevaluate exactly what constitutes your property. As they left Warehouse 7, under the watchful but no longer threatening eye of Chief Blake, Emily felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The fog had cleared and the moon cast a silver path across the harbor, the same waters her ancestors had fished for generations before being forcibly removed from their homes. What happens now? Rachel asked, as they walked away from the shipyard precious documents safely stored in James's work bag. Now, Emily said, looking back at the warehouse that had held her family's stolen legacy for over 80 years, we bring everything into the light. Behind them, Douglas Harrington remained in the warehouse, surrounded by the evidence of his family's crimes, the empire of lies beginning to crumble around him like the facade it had always been. The morning after the Warehouse 7 discovery broke cold and clear over Eagle Harbor, the kind of pristine New England autumn day that usually graced tourism brochures. But there was nothing picturesque about the scene unfolding in the coastal town. By dawn, national news vans had joined their local counterparts, transforming the quaint village center into a media encampment. Satellite dishes sprouted like metallic mushrooms in front of the town hall, and reporters clutching coffee cups conducted live broadcasts against the backdrop of Harrington Shipyard's imposing gates. The Boston Globe's front page bore the headline, Buried Truth, Historic Evidence of Theft, Discrimination, and Possible Murder Uncovered in Coastal Town. The accompanying photographs taken by Lisa Wong in Warehouse 7 showed rows of confiscated family heirlooms and damning documents that linked three of Eagle Harbor's most prominent families to decades of systematic oppression. Emily Nakamura sat at her kitchen table, the newspaper spread before her, trying to process the magnitude of what had been set in motion. Her roundhouse kick in the old gymnasium had cracked open more than just Jack Harrington's inflated ego. It had split the carefully maintained facade of Eagle Harbor's history wide open. You've started something that can't be stopped now, her grandfather said, settling into the chair across from her. Takeo Nakamura's eyes, still sharp at 93, held a mixture of pride and concern. Are you prepared for what comes next? Emily thought about the documents now secured in a safe deposit box at a bank in Boston, the copies sent to state prosecutors and civil rights attorneys, the interviews she'd given to reporters who treated her story not as teenage drama, but as the key that had unlocked a historical injustice. I don't think anyone can be fully prepared for this, she answered honestly. But I'm not backing down. The Nakamura phone had been ringing nonstop since dawn. Calls from journalists, from Japanese American advocacy groups, from former residents of Eagle Harbor, who had stories of their own to tell. James Nakamura had taken the day off from the shipyard where workers were divided between those supporting the exposure of the Harringtons' misdeeds and those fearful for their jobs if the company faced legal repercussions. The most surprising call had come just after breakfast. Harold Chen, a prominent civil rights attorney whose parents had been among the few Chinese-American families in Eagle Harbor during the 1960s. "I've been following what's happening," Chen had said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of a man accustomed to federal courtrooms. "My firm would like to represent your family and others in what could become a significant class action lawsuit. But more importantly, I grew up watching my parents face the same kind of discrimination you've documented. This is personal for me." Now as Emily prepared for what would surely be the most scrutinized day of her life, her return to Eagle Harbor Academy, after the warehouse revelations, she felt the weight of expectations from multiple communities. She was no longer just a high school senior with a talent for martial arts and art. She had become a symbol of resistance against generational injustice. "Remember who you are," her father said as he drove her to school, the family having decided it was safer than her usual walk. "Not just what others need you to be." The academy's campus was transformed. News vans lined the approach road and police officers stood at the gates checking student IDs. Reporters called out questions as Emily exited her father's car, but she kept her head high and moved forward without comment, just as her attorney had advised. Rachel was waiting just inside the main entrance, her expression a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "Everyone's talking about the warehouse," she whispered as they walked together down the main hallway. "The whole school's divided. Some people think the Harringtons are being framed. Others are saying they should be in jail." Emily noticed the changed dynamics immediately. Students who had never acknowledged her existence now watched her pass with expressions ranging from awe to resentment. The social hierarchy that had seemed so immutable just weeks ago was now in flux, with Jack Harrington's inner circle fractured in his absence. "Where's Jack?" Emily asked, realizing she hadn't seen or heard anything about him since the gymnasium incident. "His parents sent him to some private treatment facility in Vermont," Rachel replied, "officially for concussion recovery. But everyone knows it's to keep him away from the media and the legal fallout. Tyler's still here, though, and he's not happy." As if summoned by his name, Tyler Morgan appeared at the end of the hallway, his usual entourage reduced to a few die-hard supporters. The senator's son had always lived in Jack's shadow, but now he seemed to be positioning himself as the defender of the old order. "Well, if it isn't Eagle Harbor's newest celebrity," he sneered as Emily approached her locker. "Enjoying your 15 minutes, better make the most of it before everyone realizes you're just an attention-seeking—" "I wouldn't finish that sentence if I were you, Mr. Morgan," interrupted a firm voice from behind them. Principal Thompson stood there, his normally genial face set in lines of stern authority. "My office, now." As Tyler slouched away, Thompson turned to Emily. "Ms. Nakamura, when you've settled in, I'd appreciate if you'd join us as well. There are some matters we need to discuss." The principal's office had become a command center of sorts. Alongside Thompson sat Eleanor Wilson, the history teacher, whose discovery of the Harbor Files had been the first domino to fall. Also present was a woman Emily didn't recognize, middle-aged with a no-nonsense suit and the alert eyes of someone who missed nothing. "Emily, this is Ms. Diane Fujimoto from the Department of Education's Civil Rights Division," Thompson explained once everyone was seated. "She's here as part of an investigation into systemic discrimination at educational institutions in the region." Tyler slumped in his chair with practiced indifference, rolled his eyes. "This is ridiculous. My father will—" "Your father," Thompson cut in sharply, "called me personally this morning to assure me of his full cooperation with any and all investigations." It seems Senator Morgan is quite concerned about distancing himself from certain historical associations that have recently come to light. The shift in Tyler's expression was subtle but unmistakable, the first flicker of understanding that the power dynamics he'd taken for granted his entire life were rapidly changing. Ms. Fujimoto spoke directly to Emily, ignoring Tyler entirely. "We're conducting a thorough review of Eagle Harbor Academy's disciplinary records going back 20 years. The patterns we're already seeing are troubling. Differential treatment based on race, gender, and family connections appears to be deeply embedded in the institution's practices." "That's putting it mildly," Eleanor Wilson added. I've been teaching here for 40 years, and I've watched the Harringtons, Morgans, and Blakes operate as if the school existed for their benefit alone. But until now, there was never enough evidence to challenge them directly. Principal Thompson cleared his throat. Which brings us to the immediate matter at hand. Tyler, in light of your involvement in the destruction of Ms. Nakamura's property and the attempted blackmail, you are suspended pending a formal expulsion hearing next week. You can't do that, Tyler protested, bolting upright in his chair. Do you have any idea who my father is? A United States senator who is currently facing uncomfortable questions about his family's historical connection to discriminatory practices? Thompson replied evenly. I spoke with him at length this morning. He made it quite clear that you will be facing the appropriate consequences for your actions. As Tyler was escorted from the office by the school's security officer, the atmosphere shifted. Thompson's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing the exhaustion beneath. Emily, I owe you an apology, he said quietly. As principal, I should have created an environment where what happened to you was impossible. Instead, I allowed the influence of certain families to distort the school's values. For that, I am deeply sorry. And the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Emily found herself nodding in acceptance. What happens now? She asked, looking between the three adults. Now, Ms. Fujimoto said, we begin the process of institutional accountability. The Department of Education will be monitoring Eagle Harbor Academy closely, but more broadly, what you've uncovered has implications far beyond this school. The property seizures, the documented discrimination, the potential criminal conspiracy, these require a much larger response. Thompson handed Emily a thick manila envelope. These came for you this morning. College acceptance letters. Every school you applied to has not only accepted you, but offered full scholarships. Your courage has not gone unnoticed. As Emily left the office, the weight of the envelope in her hands, a tangible reminder of how much had changed in such a short time, she felt a strange mix of vindication and unease. Justice was beginning to unfold, but the path forward remained uncertain. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, media interviews, and community gatherings. The story of Eagle Harbor's buried history had struck a national nerve, becoming a focal point for discussions about historical injustice and accountability across America. Harold Chen, the civil rights attorney, had filed a landmark class action lawsuit against the Harrington Shipbuilding Corporation, the town of Eagle Harbor, and several individual defendants, including Douglas Harrington and retired police officials. The lawsuit sought not only financial compensation for descendants of Japanese-American families whose properties had been stolen, but also the establishment of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to fully document the town's history. This case represents a unique opportunity, Chen explained during a community meeting held at the local high school gymnasium, Eagle Harbor Academy's facilities having been deemed too symbolic of the elitism being challenged. Most historical injustices fade beyond the reach of our legal system. Evidence disappears, witnesses pass away, statutes of limitations expire. But here we have documented proof of continuous ongoing benefit from the original crimes. The Harringtons and their associates didn't just steal property 80 years ago. They actively maintained their control through intimidation and corruption right up to the present day. The gymnasium was packed with current and former Eagle Harbor residents, including several elderly Japanese Americans who had traveled from across the country after learning of the warehouse discoveries. Among them was Dr. Masato Watanabe, whose uncle Kenji Tanaka had died in the suspicious fire of 1947. When Dr. Watanabe stood to speak, the room fell silent. At 85, he carried himself with dignity, his voice steady despite the emotion clearly visible on his face. I was 10 years old when my uncle died, he began. I remember my father receiving the telegram, watching him collapse into a chair, his face in his hands. We never returned to Eagle Harbor after that. My family built a new life in Chicago, and we tried to forget the pain. But some wounds don't heal when they're buried, they fester. He looked directly at Emily, seated with her family in the front row. What this young woman has done is not just about property or money, it's about truth. Without truth, there can be no healing, not for the victims and not for the community that allowed such injustice to occur. As the meeting continued, Emily noticed a figure standing alone at the back of the gymnasium, Frank Sullivan, the former deputy mayor, who had preserved crucial evidence in the old gas station. He caught her eye and gave a slight nod before slipping quietly out the side door. Outside, Emily found him leaning against the brick wall, looking out over the harbor that had given the town its name and identity. "You did good, kid," Sullivan said without preamble. "Better than I ever had the courage to do." "Why did you keep all those records?" Emily asked a question that had been nagging at her since they discovered his secret archive. "You could have exposed everything decades ago." Sullivan sighed, his weathered face showing every one of his 83 years. Fear at first. The Harringtons had ways of dealing with troublemakers. Then inertia. The longer I waited, the harder it became to step forward. What would people say? Why now after all these years? And finally, shame. I'd been complicit through my silence. Each year that passed made my own guilt harder to face. He turned to look at her directly. "That's why what you did matters so much. You broke the cycle of silence when you were young enough for it to make a difference, not just for the Japanese American families, but for the soul of this town." As autumn deepened toward winter, the legal proceedings gained momentum. State prosecutors working with evidence recovered from Warehouse 7 brought criminal charges against Douglas Harrington for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. The FBI opened an investigation into potential federal crimes, including civil rights violations and fraud related to government contracts. Eagle Harbor Academy, under intense scrutiny from regulators and the media, announced sweeping reforms to its admissions, disciplinary practices, and curriculum. Principal Thompson, with the backing of a newly constituted school board, the old one having resigned en masse as the scandal unfolded, introduced a mandatory course on local history that would explicitly address the town's legacy of discrimination in the Japanese American community that had been erased. But perhaps the most significant development came on a crisp December morning when Emily received a call from her attorney. "The Harrington Corporation has offered a settlement," Chen informed her, his voice carefully neutral. "A substantial one with some unusual provisions." The terms were indeed unprecedented. Beyond financial compensation, the Harringtons would surrender specific properties to a community trust benefiting descendants of the original Japanese American owners. Warehouse 7 would be transformed into a permanent museum documenting the full history of Eagle Harbor, including its darkest chapters. And most surprisingly, Douglas Harrington had agreed to a public statement acknowledging his family's role in the historical injustices. "Why would he agree to all this?" Emily asked, suspicious of such a complete capitulation. "Two reasons," Chen replied. "First, their legal position is untenable. The evidence from the warehouse is overwhelming, and the publicity has been devastating to their business interests. But second, and perhaps more importantly, there's been an internal family division. Douglas's daughter, Catherine Harrington, has effectively taken control of the corporation. She's been cooperating with prosecutors and pushing for a comprehensive settlement from within." The name was vaguely familiar to Emily, a woman in her 40s who had rarely been seen in Eagle Harbor, rumored to have distanced herself from the family business years ago. "She reached out to me personally," Chen continued. "She wants to meet with you before the settlement is finalized. She said there's something you should know." The meeting took place at the Lighthouse Diner, now a hub of community activism since Frank Sullivan had opened its doors for organizing meetings. Catherine Harrington looked little like her father or brother, her features softer, her manner lacking the entitled arrogance that characterized the men in her family. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said as Emily slid into the booth across from her. Harold Chen sat beside Emily, while Rachel had positioned herself at a nearby table pretending to study, but clearly monitoring the conversation. "I've been following everything that's happened," Catherine continued. "Your courage in standing up to Jack and then pursuing the larger truth, it's extraordinary." "Why did you want to meet?" Emily asked directly. Catherine placed a small photo album on the table between them. "Because there's one part of this story that hasn't come out yet. Something I think you should understand before the settlement is finalized." She opened the album to reveal black and white photographs of a young woman in 1950s dress, Japanese-American beautiful, with a serious expression. "This is Akiko Tanaka," Catherine said softly. "Kenji Tanaka's daughter. After her father died in the fire, she was raised by distant relatives in Boston. She rarely spoke about Eagle Harbor or her early life there." Emily studied the photograph, noticing something familiar in the woman's features but unable to place it. "In 1955, she met a young man named William Harrington, my father, while he was attending Harvard. They fell in love despite the obvious complications. William's father, Charles Harrington, forbade the relationship when he discovered it, but they continued seeing each other secretly. Catherine turned the page to show a wedding photograph, a much younger Douglas Harrington, standing beside Akiko Tanaka, both looking somewhat defiant. They eloped in 1957. Charles Harrington disowned my father temporarily, but eventually relented on the condition that Akiko's heritage would never be mentioned in Eagle Harbor society. My mother agreed, believing it would protect any children that they might have. I was born in 1960. Emily felt a strange sensation wash over her, as if the foundations of the story she thought she knew were shifting beneath her. "You're saying Akiko Tanaka was my mother," Catherine confirmed, "which means Kenji Tanaka, the man whose property was stolen by my grandfather, the man who died in a fire that my grandfather may have orchestrated, was my maternal grandfather." The revelation hung in the air between them, its implications unfolding in layers. "Does Jack know?" Emily finally asked. Catherine shook her head. "My father kept the secret from both his children. Jack was raised to believe, as I initially was, that our mother came from a respectable Boston family. It wasn't until after she died when I was in college that I found her private journals and learned the truth." "That's why you distanced yourself from the family business," Emily realized. "Yes, I confronted my father, but he begged me to keep the secret. He claimed he'd only learned the full truth about his own father's actions years after marrying my mother, and by then the deception was too deeply entrenched to unravel without destroying everything. I couldn't forgive him, but I also couldn't bring myself to expose the truth. So I built my own life away from Eagle Harbor." "Until now," Chen observed quietly. Catherine nodded. "Until a high school girl with a black belt showed more courage than I ever did. When I saw what was happening, the warehouse discovery, the lawsuit, I knew it was finally time. I came back and forced my father to accept that the Harrington Empire built on stolen land and buried truths had to be dismantled." She pushed the photo album across the table toward Emily. "I wanted you to have this. My mother would have been proud of what you've done, and I think perhaps this is what she would have wanted all along." The truth finally brought into the light. As Emily leafed through the album, seeing photographs of Akiko throughout her life, at college graduation, holding baby Catherine, standing on the shores of Eagle Harbor, but never quite belonging there, she felt the final pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "There's one more thing," Catherine said, reaching into her briefcase. "When my mother died, she left this sealed letter for me with instructions that I should open it only if the truth about Eagle Harbor's history ever came to light. I opened it last week after the warehouse discovery made the national news." She handed Emily a copy of the letter written in elegant handwriting on yellowed paper. It detailed Akiko's memories of growing up in Strawberry Hill, her father's concerns about Charles Harrington's wartime activities, and most significantly, her suspicions about the fire that had killed her father. The night before the fire, Akiko had written, "My father told me he had found documents proving that Charles Harrington had sold Navy shipbuilding materials on the black market during the war. He was planning to take this evidence to federal authorities. The next night, our house burned with him inside it. I have lived my entire life with the terrible suspicion that my father-in-law was responsible for my father's death. By marrying his son, perhaps I sought some unconscious revenge, infiltrating the family that had destroyed mine. Or perhaps it was simply fate's dark irony." The letter concluded with a passage that brought tears to Emily's eyes. "If you are reading this, Catherine, it means the buried truths of Eagle Harbor have finally surfaced. Remember that healing can only begin with honesty, no matter how painful. The Tanaka blood in your veins is not something to hide, it is something to honor. As winter gave way to spring, Eagle Harbor underwent a transformation more profound than mere seasonal change. The class action lawsuit was settled for a historic sum, with funds allocated not only to direct descendants of dispossessed families, but also to community restoration projects in what had once been Strawberry Hill. The Harrington Shipyard, restructured under Catherine's leadership, established a scholarship fund for Japanese-American students pursuing maritime careers. Warehouse 7, as stipulated in the settlement, became the Eagle Harbor Historical Center, its displays documenting both the town's celebrated maritime history and its darker legacy of discrimination and theft. The opening ceremony featured Takeo Nakamura cutting the ribbon, his weathered hands steady, as he officially reclaimed a piece of his community's stolen heritage. The legal consequences rippled outward. Chief Blake resigned, cooperating with investigators in exchange for immunity. Douglas Harrington faced criminal charges, eventually accepting a plea deal that included community service and financial restitution. Jack Harrington returned from his Vermont retreat. A significantly subdued figure was required to complete an intensive restorative justice program that included educational components about the history his family had tried to erase. At Eagle Harbor Academy, the changes were equally profound. The school's board of trustees was reconstituted to include diverse community representatives. A new scholarship program specifically targeted students from backgrounds historically excluded from the elite institution. And perhaps most symbolically, the old gymnasium where Emily's roundhouse kick had set everything in motion was renamed the Tanaka Nakamura Athletic Center, honoring the two families whose intertwined stories had finally broken the cycle of silence. For Emily personally, the months following the settlement brought both recognition and reflection. College acceptance letters had transformed into full scholarships with Yale, Stanford, and Columbia, all actively recruiting her. The Japanese American Citizens League presented her with their annual Courage Award. Documentary filmmakers sought interviews, and publishers approached her about a potential memoir. But amid the external validation, Emily found herself drawn to quieter moments of personal significance. Walking with her grandfather along the harbor shore, helping to catalog items returned from Warehouse 7, teaching a children's martial arts class that included students from every background in the newly diverse Eagle Harbor community. On a mild April evening just weeks before graduation, Emily stood at the edge of what had once been Strawberry Hill, watching the sunset paint the harbor waters in shades of gold and crimson. The site, long occupied by luxury condominiums in the Harrington Marina, was now partly reclaimed a waterfront park under construction, its design incorporating elements of Japanese garden traditions alongside New England maritime aesthetics. "It's coming along nicely," said a voice behind her. Emily turned to find Catherine Harrington approaching architectural plans tucked under her arm. "The landscape architect incorporated your grandfather's suggestions," Catherine continued, unfolding the plans to show Emily. "The cherry trees will be planted here along this pathway. We've named it Remembrance Walk." Emily studied the designs, noting how skillfully they balanced acknowledgement of the past with hope for the future. "It's beautiful," she said simply. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the fishing boats returning to harbor, some owned by descendants of the original Japanese-American fishing families now able to reclaim their maritime heritage. "Have you decided?" Catherine asked, finally nodding toward the Yale sweatshirt Emily wore. "Columbia's international law program made a compelling case, I heard." Emily smiled. "Yale. Their art and East Asian studies departments won me over. Plus, they're establishing a social justice center that focuses on historical reparations. They want me to contribute to their oral history project about Eagle Harbor." "A good choice," Catherine approved. "And after college?" The question was one Emily had been considering deeply. The events of the past months had opened paths she'd never imagined possible. Law school, maybe, or perhaps international human rights work. "Mr. Chen thinks I have a future in advocacy." She paused, watching a seagull wheel overhead. "But first I want to visit Japan, connect with that part of my heritage. My grandfather's been teaching me Japanese, and there are relatives there I've never met." Catherine nodded in understanding. "Finding your roots to better understand your future. That makes sense." As the sun slipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across what had once been Strawberry Hill, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a shy girl hiding her strength to someone who had helped rewrite her town's history. From a teenager worried about college applications to a young woman with a clear sense of purpose. "You know," Catherine said thoughtfully, "what happened here, both the original injustice and the recent reckoning. It's not just Eagle Harbor's story, it's America's story. The buried truths, the delayed justice, the painful but necessary reconciliation. These patterns repeat across our national history. Which is why the truth matters so much," Emily replied. "Even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable." In the distance, they could see lights being turned on at the old Hudson gas station, now renovated as a community center, where Frank Sullivan hosted weekly discussions about local history and civic responsibility. The former deputy mayor had found an unexpected second act as a keeper of memories no longer hidden in a basement archive but shared openly with new generations. "Your kick heard round the harbor," Catherine mused, a slight smile playing at her lips. Who would have thought that one moment of standing up for yourself would lead to all this? Emily thought about that pivotal moment in the old gymnasium, the perfect roundhouse kick that had connected not just with Jack Harrington's head, but with the fragile facade of denial that had protected Eagle Harbor's powerful families for generations. My grandfather has a saying, she replied. Sometimes the most important fight is the one you never planned to have. As they walked back toward town, Emily noticed how the residents of Eagle Harbor now greeted her not with the wary distance they had once shown the foreign girl, but with the respect due to someone who had helped a community face its past honestly. Even more gratifying were the smiles and high fives from younger students who saw in her an example of courage they hoped to emulate. The final weeks of her senior year passed in a whirlwind of activities. Emily's art portfolio, partially reconstructed and supplemented with new works inspired by her family's history, won state recognition. The martial arts program she had started at the academy expanded to include community classes. And in a poetic bit of symmetry, she was asked to speak at graduation, the first Japanese-American valedictorian in Eagle Harbor Academy's 150-year history. On graduation day, as Emily stood at the podium looking out over her classmates, their families, and the community that had been transformed, she felt the weight of all that had happened and all that remained to be done. When I entered Eagle Harbor Academy 4 years ago, she began, I tried to make myself invisible. I hid my strength, my heritage, my voice because I believed that was the price of belonging. I was wrong. True belonging never requires us to be less than who we are. It asks us to bring our full selves forward, even when, especially when doing so, challenges comfortable falsehoods. From her vantage point, she could see her parents and grandfather in the front row, their faces shining with pride. Behind them sat Rachel and her family, Eleanor Wilson, Principal Thompson, and Frank Sullivan. And somewhat surprisingly, in a row near the back sat Catherine Harrington beside her, Father Douglas and Brother Jack, 3 generations of a family, now publicly reckoning with their complex legacy. Eagle Harbor's history, like our nation's, contains chapters of both inspiration and shame, Emily continued. For too long, we read only the parts that made us comfortable. But selective memory is not history, it's mythology. And while myths may comfort us, only truth can heal us. She paused, looking out over the harbor. Visible beyond the school's manicured grounds, the waters that had sustained generations of her family before the internment, the shores where they had built lives only to have them stolen away, the community now cautiously rebuilding connections across racial and economic divides. As we graduate today, we inherit both the achievements and the failures of those who came before us. We inherit responsibility for creating a future where justice is not delayed for generations, where truth is not buried in warehouses, where belonging doesn't require conformity or silence. The applause that followed her speech seemed to Emily like a promise, not that the work of reconciliation was complete, but that it would continue, that the truth once exposed to light would not be buried again. After the ceremony, as families mingled on the school lawn, Takeo Nakamura approached his granddaughter. The old soldier who had fought for America while his family was interned, who had returned with medals only to find his community erased, now stood tall in a formal suit, his white hair gleaming in the summer sun. Emily-chan, he said softly, using the affectionate Japanese diminutive he had called her since childhood. Today you have honored all our ancestors, those who crossed oceans seeking new beginnings, those who endured when their loyalty was questioned, those who kept our stories alive when others tried to erase them. He pressed something into her hand, a small, worn wooden box. Inside lay a simple silver key. This opened our family's fishing shop before the war, Takeo explained. My father gave it to me when I shipped out to Europe with the 442nd. He said, keep this safe. One day we will unlock our own doors again. I have carried it for 80 years, waiting for the right moment to pass it on. Emily closed her fingers around the key, feeling its weight, not just metal, but history, identity, continuity. The building is gone, she said softly. The building, yes, her grandfather agreed, but not what it represents, not the right to own our story, not the responsibility to ensure others can own theirs. As the graduation crowds dispersed and the summer twilight settled over Eagle Harbor, Emily walked with her family and friends to the waterfront park, taking shape on what had once been Strawberry Hill. Construction equipment stood silent, waiting for the next day's work. The framework of what would become a ceremonial gate marked the entrance, its design echoing traditional Japanese torii while incorporating elements of New England shipbuilding craftsmanship. Frank Sullivan, leaning on a cane but still spry for his age, pointed to a section of the park where memorial stones would eventually bear the names of Eagle Harbor's Japanese-American families. Your great-grandfather's name will be first, he told Emily. Hideo Nakamura, the man who knew too much and paid with his life, but now his truth lives again. Rachel, who had become something of a local historian through her involvement in the warehouse investigations, added, "The elementary schools are already using the new curriculum we helped develop. Kids are learning the complete history, not just the sanitized version." Emily nodded satisfaction, warming her, despite the evening chill coming off the water. The achievement wasn't in punishing the Harringtons or exposing past wrongs for their own sake, but in restoring balance to a narrative that had been deliberately distorted, in creating space for multiple truths to coexist. As the group made their way back toward town, Emily noticed Jack Harrington standing alone at the edge of the marina, gazing out at the harbor. On impulse, she detached herself from her friends and approached him. They hadn't spoken directly since the gymnasium confrontation that had changed everything. He tensed as he noticed her approach, but didn't leave. Up close, Jack looked different from the arrogant boy who had threatened her months ago. Something had shifted in his expression, the entitled certainty replaced by a more complex awareness. "Congratulations on graduation," he said awkwardly. "Your speech was good." "Thank you," Emily replied, keeping a respectful distance between them. "How are you doing with everything?" Jack gave a short, humorless laugh. "Finding out my mother was Japanese-American, that my grandfather might have been responsible for killing my other grandfather, that everything I thought about my family was built on lies." He shook his head. "It's been an adjustment." "I can imagine," Emily said, though in truth she couldn't fully comprehend the identity crisis he must be experiencing. "The thing is," Jack continued, his voice dropping as he stared out at the water, "part of me always knew something wasn't right. The way my father talked about certain people, the family secrets, the power we just assumed was our birthright. I never questioned it because it benefited me, and that's on me." Emily said nothing, sensing he needed to articulate thoughts he'd been wrestling with privately. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he clarified quickly. "What I did to you and others, there's no excuse, but I want you to know I'm trying to understand. The restorative justice program, the therapy, it's helping me see things differently." "That's a start," Emily acknowledged, neither absolving nor condemning him. They stood in silence for a moment, the gentle lapping of harbor waves against the docks, the only sound between them. "My sister told me you're going to Yale," Jack finally said. "I was supposed to go there too. Legacy admission. But I've decided to take a different path. I'm enlisting in the Navy instead, following the actual family tradition of service, not exploitation." The irony wasn't lost on Emily, the great-grandson of a man who had defrauded the Navy during wartime, now seeking redemption through service to the same institution. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said simply. As Jack walked away, Emily remained at the water's edge, watching the last light fade from the sky. The harbor that had given the town its name now reflected the first evening stars, the same stars that had guided her ancestors across the Pacific generations ago, the same stars that had witnessed both the darkest moments of injustice and the recent steps toward healing. In her pocket, Emily's fingers closed around her great-grandfather's key. Not a key to any existing door, but to something more enduring. The right to one's history, the responsibility to face it honestly, and the possibility of building something new from the full truth of what came before. As she turned to rejoin her waiting family, Emily Nakamura, artist, martial artist, catalyst for change, carried with her the knowledge that some fights choose us, rather than the other way around. And sometimes a single moment of standing firmly in one's truth can crack open the walls of silence that have contained generations of injustice. Behind her, Eagle Harbor settled into evening, its waters reflecting lights both old and new, a community beginning the long, necessary work of reconciliation with its complete self.